Hey guys, this is Robert NES 816 and I'm going to be reviewing the NES Advantage, and I'm also going to go over what to look for if you're looking for one of these out in the wild. There is a smooth top and a rough top version. The smooth top is much more common to find. The rough top is a little bit harder to find since it's newer. These came out in, I believe, the late 80s, actually early 90s I want to say. This came out in 87. These came out probably around maybe 89 to 90, somewhere around there. These aren't as common to find. As far as the differences go, it's just the changes in the plastic texture. That's basically it. They're both identical. Taking them apart will reveal that this one has a plastic bracket holding in the wires, whereas this one does not. That's the only differences internally. Okay, so everything I say about this Advantage applies to this Advantage as well. As far as features go, we have an adjustable turbo pot here. We have a slow button, start select, and a 1 or 2 player selection. So I'll get to that later on. The A and B buttons do not have micro switches. They are backed by rubber button contacts, much like the NES controller. The arcade stick, as I like to call it, I'm bumping my camera. The arcade stick has also got rubber contacts. It is normal for these to have a large dead spot in the middle. However, when you reach the end, you want to hear that click. Go there again. I'm going to hold it in my hands. But okay, so how the turbo works on the A and B buttons. Most shooters, if you're using a turbo control that is either third party or just a crappy one in general, will give you a 3-shot burst. This, however, since it has an adjustable pot, will give you the ability to fine-tune your turbo ability so that you have a steady spray. So basically enable turbo by turning the switch on. Holding down the button will give you turbo fire, whatever this is set at, and this LED will flash at however fast you have the turbo enabled. So basically holding down the A or B button, whichever button you're using for shooting, you're going to adjust your turbo. And you'll see the LED light will flash in synchronization with however fast you, whatever speed you have this pot set at. So basically you're going to adjust this while holding down this button until you get a smooth rate of fire. Turn it off, disables turbo. Same thing with this one. Turn it on, enables turbo, hold down this button, and then you can adjust your pot. Slow function basically puts the pause on 1,000,000 times a second, so if your game has a menu, when you hit the start button, it's basically 1 and 2. This is for older NES games that do not have a co-op mode, so like Super Mario Bros. 3, 2, and 1 all have 2-player modes, but they are also, you play one at a time. So the Advantage comes with 2 plugs, and one of them has a white wire, the other one has a black wire. The white wire is player 1, the black wire is player 2. When you're using this controller, always make sure the white wire is in player 1 and the black wire is in player 2. Otherwise, you will never get full functionality out of your controller and it will not work properly. Start and select might not work, and also the A and B might give you issues. Also, trying to select between the two will not do anything since the controller is not hooked up properly. So always make sure the white wire is in player 1 and that the controller is in player 1 when player 1 is activated or whatever. So finding one of these out in the wild, well, that is still pretty easy since Nintendo made millions of these things, and this is, I want to say, Nintendo's most popular accessory for the NES. I had one of these as a kid, and I'm sure millions of other kids had these as well. I now have 4 of these freaking things. I don't know why I have 4 of them, probably because they're my favorite accessory ever. I also have 4 NES front loaders, so maybe subconsciously I want to have like a complete set with all of these things. When looking for one of these in the wild, there's many things you have to consider. The first thing is that years ago, these used to sell for like $5 and cheaper. These days, since everyone knows about retro gaming and stuff like that, these pretty much sell for between $10 to $20, mostly $20 today, unfortunately, even if they're in shitty condition. Examining one of these things before you buy one. At the tops of the buttons here, they all have a rough texture. You want to make sure that rough texture is intact. If it's smooth on the top, that's already setting off a warning sign to you. If these buttons feel like shit when you push them, like you see how these have a clicky feeling to them, and they spring right back up after you push them, that's an indication that these things have had a little use. Also, I'm not really sure if my camera can see the texture here, but these have a rough surface throughout the tops of these buttons, and also the sides of these buttons don't have any wear marks. So that's already a good sign that you want to pick up an NES Advantage like this one. Also, the slow or start and select buttons are not yellowed, and they also have the rough texture on top, and they feel really good when you push them. You see how they have that clicky sort of hollow sound? Same thing with the older NES Advantages. These also had a texture on top of the buttons, and they also had a texture on top of the start and select buttons as well, and they have the same sound. Also, going back to this one, and again, what I say about this one applies to the other one. The turbo switches, make sure that they both work. See how they pop back up when they're off? And the slow button, and the player 1 and 2 button. Make sure it has that nice clicky switch feel to it. And the tuning pots. These have to feel smooth, and you have to feel a little bit of resistance when you're tuning them, or turning them rather. And finally, before I get onto the cord, is the arcade stick itself. This will have a large dead spot in the middle, and it always returns to center. This is because it has a large spring in the middle of it, and this is basically a large D-pad. So there is a ball at the bottom or the center of this, much like the D-pad on a NES controller. And there are 4 contacts at the left, right, up, and down. So what you're going to do is take the arcade stick, push it all the way up, and at the end of its travel, you're going to feel a click. That's the arcade stick pushing down on the contact. So you hear the click, and you're going to listen to that sound. Same thing with this one. Okay? And basically the way I'm doing that is I'm holding the controller in a certain way, because I won't always do it, but like that. So if you move it, you won't always hear that click, but you'll feel it. And at the very end of its travel, you actually feel the this stick here pushing down on the button contacts. And the bottom of this arcade stick is shaped sort of like a I don't really know how to describe it though, but like a 4-point cross, I guess you could say, or like a D-pad rather, like a large D-pad on the bottom. The bottoms of these. So if a kid spilled a drink in this thing back in the day, it's gonna basically result in rust today because it's had 20 years to damage the metal. So on the bottoms of these are metals. These are made from metal. It's basically black painted metal. These things should have the sticker still intact, should have the 4 rubber feet still intact, and the screw heads should also be intact. They should not be stripped out, worn out, or anything like that. And again, you're going to look for rust, because metal likes to rust, especially when it has stuff spilled on it. So if that happens, it will usually spill out the side here, whatever liquid was spilled in here. So you're going to look for rust around the edges. Also, these feet, depending on how it was stored and whatever temperatures it was exposed to, these feet will sort of slide down as the glue softens up, and pretty much these things will slide down over the years. That's not really a big deal because you could just unglue this and stick them right back on. Also, make sure that all these feet are still intact, because otherwise the thing will just wobble all over the place. Depending on wherever the controller was stored, the cord might still feel stiff like it was when it was new, so you can see how this one has a memory, or it will feel, I guess, loose like this one does, but it still sort of has a memory. Most importantly, however, is you will search for bite marks. Mice love to chew on Nintendo cords and Sega Genesis cords. So you're going to look for bite marks, you're going to look for tears, rips, anything that basically results in the raw wire showing through the insulation. If you see that, skip it. Don't even pay for it. Or if you want to buy it, make sure you get it for a cheap price, and hopefully it'll work, or you can get it for parts to restore another one that you have. But always make sure you look at the wire. Ripped wires is bad. So if you see one of these that has like electrical tape over the wires or whatever, skip it. These also have a tendency to yellow, just like the NES console. Yellowing is fixable. However, if it gets to a point where the metal or the rubber, going through the whole thing, the plastic starts chipping, again, skip it. Yellowing can be repaired, but if it's already at the point where the plastic is becoming brittle, skip it, don't buy it. Most of the time with yellowed controllers, I find that they are really worn out to begin with, so it's usually not worth it to buy one. But in this particular case with this one, like I said before, this one I actually did have to completely disassemble and take apart, and I pretty much restored it back. This one just had cosmetic, not really damage, but just flaws on it. It had lots of dust and cobwebs and just everything all over it. The start and select buttons had like Dorito residue all over them, and these buttons were actually yellowed. I was able to fix that and clean off all of the cosmetic issues that it had. They weren't flaws, they were just I guess issues, just things that occurred from this thing sitting around and getting beat up just from years of not being used. As far as my review for the NES Advantage and nitpicking about if you're buying one, remember, don't pay top dollar for one of these things. They retail today for some reason between $10 to $20. Always try to pay $10 for one. If you can get even cheaper, great. I got this one at a garage sale. I paid practically nothing for it, and this one I paid like $10 for. So basically, keep that in mind. All right, guys, have a great day.